What would you do if the man you trusted for 5 years stood up in a 5-star restaurant, smiled at strangers, and then slapped you across the face? The champagne was still bubbling when his hand hit my cheek. 5 years of marriage, and this was how Liam Carter chose to celebrate. But here's the thing about being the quiet wife. Sometimes we've been planning our exit far longer than anyone realizes. It was supposed to be a romantic night. I wore the emerald green dress he gave me last Christmas, the one he said brought out my eyes. I had spent an hour curling my hair just right, fixing my makeup to perfection, and convincing myself this night might be the moment our marriage finally turned a corner. That maybe, just maybe, he'd start seeing me as a partner instead of a polished prop. The restaurant was called the Elmore Room. Polished marble floors, whispering waiters, a wine list thick as a Bible. The kind of place where the silverware had more weight than the conversation. Liam looked handsome, of course. He always did. Expensive suit. Watch that cost more than my first car. Eyes on his phone, checking messages from people who weren't me. I sat across from him and smiled. That's what I did. I smiled. While he ordered without asking me what I wanted, while he spoke about his next big deal at RevFit Capital, while he told me which new car he was thinking about buying, and I nodded, just like I'd been trained to, like the good wife I had become. But something inside me was different that night. I could feel it rising like heat behind my ribs, like a truth I had swallowed one too many times and couldn't hold down anymore. When the champagne arrived, he raised his glass. To 5 more years, he said, his smile practiced, his tone hollow. 5 more years. 5 more years of being interrupted, overlooked, dismissed. No, not anymore, so I said it. Maybe it was the champagne, or maybe it was 5 years of silence that finally found its voice. I looked up and said, Liam, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we started trying for a baby. His fork paused mid-air. The world didn't end, the music didn't stop, but his face changed. Slowly, sharply. Maya, he said, no. He didn't call me Maya. I'm not Maya. I'm Amelia Carter, and I won't forget my name again. Amelia, he said with that patronizing smirk, we've talked about this. You're not ready. Not ready. We're not ready. You're not ready. Like he had the final say on whether or not I could be a mother. I felt something snap inside me. A tight wire of control that had held for 5 long years. I looked him straight in the eyes. Actually, we haven't talked about it. You decided, and I complied. I'm 32, Liam. I know what I want, and I know what I'm capable of. The temperature in the room dropped. I saw it happen the shift. His smile cracked. The mask slipped. Don't you dare contradict me in public, he hissed, leaning in close enough for me to smell the wine on his breath. You can barely manage your own life, Amelia. You want a child now? That's rich. At the next table, a couple paused mid-bite. The waiter nearby froze, and me. I was no longer embarrassed. I was angry. You mean the life where I gave up my career to support yours? Where I moved across the country, left my family, changed everything so you could climb RevFit's ladder? That life I can't manage. That's when it happened. The slap wasn't loud. But in the hush of fine dining and white tablecloths, it might as well have been thunder. It knocked my head to the side. My vision blurred. My skin stung with heat, but it was the silence afterward that truly rang. Every head turned. Every eye burned into me. I touched my cheek, and when I looked at Liam, his expression was unreadable, part shock, part calculation. Oh my God, Amelia, he said suddenly, loudly, reaching across the table like a desperate actor. I don't know what came over me. The stress, the promotion, the pressure. It was all performance, every word. A script he had rehearsed without my consent. I stood up. Excuse me, I whispered. My voice calm, my legs shaky. I walked past the onlookers, past the people who looked down or away, into the bathroom, and I stared at my reflection. The red mark on my cheek was already darkening. My lipstick was smeared, my eyeliner streaked. But what startled me most wasn't the makeup or the swelling, it was the look in my eyes. For the first time in years, I looked fully awake. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flash, and took a picture. Click. Then I created a folder and gave it a name. Evidence. You don't fall into silence all at once. It's not a thunderclap, it's a slow fade, a gradual quieting of the voice inside you. And Amelia Carter had become an expert at going quiet. Long before that slap at the Elmore room, long before the evidence folder, long before I knew the exact date I'd file for divorce. I was shrinking. Not physically, of course, but in all the ways that matter more. At first, Liam Carter didn't seem like the kind of man who needed to be in control. He was charming, generous. The kind of man who would open your door and order your meal, and you'd think it was chivalry, not control. I met him when I was 26, a rising publicist with a promising career in Chicago. Liam was already established in corporate finance, working for RevFit Capital, with a reputation for turning failing departments into golden profit machines. When he courted me, he made it seem like I was his missing piece. "You're the calm to my chaos," he used to say. And I believed him. So when he suggested I move to New York for a fresh start together, I said yes. When he said I didn't need to work, that his income was more than enough, I hesitated. But I said yes again. And when he told his friends I had retired to focus on family, I smiled, even though no family existed yet. I started saying yes to things that chipped away at me, yes to fewer friends, yes to changing my clothes because he thought a different cut was more classy, yes to cancelling a trip home because he had an important dinner with partners, yes to making myself agreeable, palatable, polished. I told myself it was love, that relationships required compromise, that what I was giving up was being replaced by something better, stability, protection, success. What I didn't see at the time was that I wasn't compromising, I was disappearing. It started small. He corrected the way I spoke in public. He laughed when I mispronounced the name of a wine, then told the waiter to bring me something simpler. He made jokes at my expense during dinner parties, calling me his beautiful disaster, and everyone laughed because I laughed. But I didn't laugh in the shower. I didn't laugh when I sat alone in a cafe, checking my email out of habit, only to remember I no longer had clients, co-workers, or deadlines. I wasn't a wife. I was a prop. At events, I stood by his side, always smiling, always supportive, always silent. "Your wife is so poised," his colleagues would say. "I trained her well," Liam once replied with a wink. They thought it was cute, but something inside me flinched. There were good days. Of course there were. Days when Liam would surprise me with flowers. Nights when we danced in our kitchen to old Motown songs, tipsy on good wine. Mornings when he kissed my forehead and called me his lucky charm. But love built on conditions isn't love, it's leverage, and Liam's love was full of terms. I had to look a certain way, behave a certain way, support him unconditionally even when he forgot to ask what I wanted. One day I mentioned I might want to return to work, maybe freelance again. He laughed. "You don't need to work, Amelia. That's the whole point of having a husband who can provide." I said nothing. I started saying nothing more often. Silence became easier than defending myself, than explaining why I missed feeling competent, why I missed using my voice. The most dangerous part, I started believing maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't ready to be a mother. Maybe I wasn't capable of juggling a career and a relationship. Maybe I was too emotional, too sensitive, too needy. That's the power of a slow erasure. It doesn't rip pages out. It rewrites the story in small, almost invisible edits. By the time our 5th anniversary rolled around, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was elegant, yes. Polished, yes. But behind the eyes, there was a vacancy I couldn't ignore. I had trained myself to stay small in every conversation, to smile when dismissed, to laugh when undermined, and Liam never had to raise his voice because I had learned to silence my own. But somewhere inside me, a fire was still smouldering. Every time I felt a pang of resentment, every time I caught my reflection and saw someone I didn't know, that fire grew. I just didn't realize it yet. Not until the slap. Not until I looked into the mirror and saw someone else entirely. Someone I hadn't seen in years. Not Liam's wife. Me. The bathroom at the Elmore room was made for women, like the one I used to pretend to be. Marble countertops, lavender-scented towels, a full-length mirror with golden framing. It was the kind of place where wives reapply lipstick, not reconsider their entire marriage. But that night, I wasn't fixing my makeup. I was facing a stranger. The red mark on my cheek pulsed with heat. A perfect outline of Liam's hand. It looked surreal, like something out of a drama I'd never thought I'd star in. But it wasn't fiction. This was my life. I touched the mark, half expecting it to vanish. It didn't. Instead, I caught my own eyes in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I didn't look away. There was something there I hadn't seen in a long time. Not fear, not sadness. Clarity. It wasn't just the slap. It was the final straw in a haystack of swallowed words and silent nights, of smiling through humiliation and nodding through gaslighting. And that clarity whispered one word in my ear. Enough. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My hand didn't shake. I turned the camera toward myself and pressed the shutter. The flash caught everything. The handprint, the swelling, the woman staring back, not broken, but awake. I created a folder and labeled it the way my mind already had. Evidence. Because this time, I wasn't going to forget. I wasn't going to let him twist the story, soften the truth, or sweep it under another expensive rug. I walked back to the table on steadier legs than I expected. Liam was doing what Liam always did, damage control. He was speaking to the waiter with that well-practiced tone. Warm, self-deprecating, vaguely remorseful. They had a little disagreement, nothing serious, just married people things, I overheard him say as I approached. When he saw me, he stood and pulled out my chair. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "everything's fine now. I told them it was just a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding, as if his palm had accidentally met my cheek. As if 5 years of erasure were just a miscommunication. I sat down and smiled. The same smile I had worn for 5 years. But inside I was watching, learning, cataloguing. I wasn't the same woman who walked into that restaurant hoping for a romantic toast. I wasn't the same woman who stayed quiet every time he made decisions for both of us. I wasn't the same woman who once begged herself to believe that love meant staying, even when it hurt. I was someone else now. Someone who understood that silence was no longer safety, it was complicity. Liam reached across the table and took my hand. His thumb brushed against my skin, a performative gesture of tenderness. "You know I love you, right? I just want what's best for us." I nodded slowly, my eyes on his. He believed he had won. Again. But something deep inside me had shifted, and it wasn't going back. Later that night at home, Liam poured himself a drink and turned on the TV like nothing had happened. I told him I was going to bed early. He kissed my forehead and said, "Let's not let one bad moment ruin a good night, a good night." I said nothing. I walked into the bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed in silence. I opened the evidence folder on my phone, and I added a new entry, audio recording. From that moment on, every time Liam spoke to me with that familiar condescension, every time he raised his voice behind closed doors, I recorded it. When I found old bruises I had explained away as clumsiness, I photographed them. When I stumbled across receipts and financial statements addressed to him, A loan, investments I'd never been told about. I scanned them. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't documenting our memories, I was documenting my truth. And it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not revenge, not yet. Just a quiet, steady gathering of power. There's something sacred about reclaiming the narrative after someone else has twisted it for so long. I stopped explaining myself to him. I started making copies of things. I created a second email account. I found a therapist. I didn't tell him. I looked up divorce attorneys and bookmarked the ones that specialized in emotional abuse and hidden assets. And all the while, I smiled when he talked about our future, because now I had one too separate, unapproved, and entirely mine. The slap didn't break me. It freed me, because the moment Liam lost control of his mask, he gave me permission to stop wearing mine. And for the first time since becoming Amelia Carter, someone's wife, I started remembering who I was before the ring, before the move, before the silence. Someone who spoke freely, someone who trusted her instincts, someone who deserved more than being someone else's well-dressed shadow. That night didn't end in confrontation. It ended with a decision, a quiet vow I made to myself as I lay beside him in the dark, listening to the rhythm of his sleep. This ends. But it ends on my terms, not when I'm scared, not when I'm broken, but when I'm ready and he's not. They say when you're finally ready to leave, you start noticing everything, and I did. I noticed the way Liam Carter would change his tone depending on who was in the room, the way his smile would soften for strangers, then harden behind closed doors, the way he used silence not as peace, but as punishment. But this time I didn't ignore it. I recorded it. My phone became my secret weapon. Every time he raised his voice just enough to sting, but not enough to leave a mark, I tapped record. When he made degrading remarks masked as jokes, I saved them. "You're lucky I put up with your moods, Amelia," he'd mutter after slamming a cabinet door. Or, "If I left you, what would you even be? A woman with no job, no money, and no real skills?" I used to cry in private when he said things like that. Now, I clicked save to drive. I started collecting evidence not out of spite, but out of strategy. Because I knew something now. Liam's greatest fear wasn't losing me. It was losing his image. To the world, he was the golden boy of RevFit Capital, the man who shook hands, gave to charities, smiled perfectly in holiday cards, a man who toasted to partnership at corporate retreats, a man who, as he once told me, had everything under control. That phrase stuck with me. Everything under control. I had spent 5 years living under his idea of control, but now the control was slowly shifting, and he didn't know it yet. One afternoon while he was out, I opened his filing cabinet. It wasn't locked. He never thought he needed to lock it. Why would he? I was too overwhelmed to manage finances, remember? Inside were folders upon folders, investment accounts I hadn't seen, statements from banks I didn't recognize, transactions with large amounts moved into what looked like private holdings. I snapped photos of every page. I didn't even breathe too loudly. I organized them by date in a password-protected folder on a flash drive I kept in the lining of an old purse. A week later, I found an old iPad he'd left in a desk drawer. It wasn't password-protected. He used it for meetings and client presentations. But I found saved PDFs, prenup drafts, asset transfers, a list titled Amelia Exit Plan. That one nearly made my stomach drop. It outlined how, if we divorced, he'd propose a modest settlement enough to keep me quiet, but far less than I deserved. It included bullet points for what to say in public. We drifted apart. We remain friends. We're both moving forward peacefully. He had written my lines for me. I didn't cry. I took screenshots, then I searched online for a divorce attorney, not just any attorney. One who specialized in covert abuse, financial coercion, and high net worth manipulation. I scheduled a consultation under a different name. I told the assistant I'd call back from a public phone. I did. And all the while I played the part. At dinner I smiled. When Liam joked with his co-workers that I was his anchor, I laughed, and in private I kept gathering. I found bruises on my arm one morning after he had grabbed me too tightly during an argument. I took a picture, dated it. I took photos of prescription bottles, the ones I had started using for stress-induced migraines. I recorded a voice memo the night he told me I was lucky someone still found me desirable. Each file was like a brick, not for a wall but for a platform. One I would one day stand on and speak from. I started to write in a journal again, nothing dramatic, just facts. Where we were, what was said, what was done. If something ever happened to me, I wanted a record no one could dispute. I kept the journal at my therapist's office. Yes, I had a therapist now. Liam didn't know. I paid in cash. I booked appointments under a maiden name. And slowly, I started rebuilding myself behind the scenes. One afternoon, I stopped in front of a boutique. There was a black dress in the window, structured, simple, powerful. Not at all Liam's taste. I walked in and bought it. The saleswoman said, "You have an event?" I smiled. You could say that. I was planning my debut, not as Liam Carter's wife, but as Amelia Carter, the woman he tried to silence and failed. He still didn't suspect a thing. That's the part that always amazes people when I tell this story. How didn't he know? Because men like Liam don't believe women like me can turn. They confuse quiet with weak, compliance with stupidity, kindness with submission. But they forget those of us who survive in silence are also experts in observation. We learn every trigger, every pattern, every opening. And when the moment finally comes, we strike not with rage, but with receipts. If you had seen me that week, you would have thought I was happy. I went to Pilates. I baked muffins for the neighbors. I attended a charity luncheon with Liam's co-workers and laughed at their tired jokes. I nodded and smiled. I even wore the pearl earrings Liam had given me after our second anniversary, the ones he said made me look polished. To everyone around us, we were still the Carter couple. Successful, harmonious, aspirational. And I played the role to perfection, because that's what he had taught me to do. And that's exactly what I needed for just a little longer. The night I bought the black dress, the one that didn't need his approval, I knew it was time. I circled the date of the annual Partners Gala on my calendar like a woman marking a full moon. That would be the night. The night I gave Liam Carter what he truly feared, an audience. He had spent years shaping his public image, curating it like a museum exhibit. The charming executive, the loving husband, the man who always stayed in control. But he forgot one thing. A house built on lies can't survive when one person stops pretending, and I had stopped. In the days leading up to the gala, I perfected my act. I offered to help him pick out a new tie for the event. I complimented the speech he was preparing to deliver when RevFit Capital presented him with the Leadership and Partnership Award. Oh, the irony. I memorized every transition in that speech. I knew exactly when he would call me up as his rock, his anchor, his beautiful, understanding wife. He didn't know I'd be bringing my own script. The evidence folder on my phone had grown heavy. Screenshots of account transfers, audio of his outbursts, photos that proved bruises don't lie. And still, I kept gathering. That week, I printed hard copies of the financial documents and tucked them into a slim black portfolio I purchased under a different name. I met again with the attorney I'd quietly retained this time to hand over a full file. Everything was aligned. But this wasn't about court not yet. This was about something more primal, truth. And the power that comes from finally speaking it out loud. The night of the gala, Liam was electric, buzzing with adrenaline, rehearsing lines under his breath as we rode to the hotel ballroom in our town car. He looked over at me and smiled. "You look incredible tonight." I smiled back. "Thank you," I said.
I didn't remind him that I had chosen the dress, that I had bought it myself, that it made me feel powerful, not pretty. When we stepped into the ballroom, the air shimmered with ambition. Men in tuxedos and women in sequins talked IPOs over glasses of champagne. This was Liam's world. He shook hands, slapped backs. Introduced me to partners I'd met 3 times before. "This is Amelia," he'd say. "You know, my secret weapon." And every time I gave the same smile. The one I'd mastered, the one that said, "I'm the wife you think I am." And while he worked the room, I waited. I watched the clock. I traced the edges of the speech tucked inside my clutch, the one Liam didn't know existed. It was just a few minutes long. But it would change everything. When the lights dimmed and the CEO of RevFit took the stage, Liam leaned over and whispered, "It's almost time." And it was. The awards presentation began. A few people clapped politely for lesser-known executives. Then it was Liam's turn. "Tonight," the CEO said, "we honor a man who exemplifies leadership and integrity. Please welcome our own Liam Carter." Applause rose around me as Liam walked confidently to the podium, adjusting his cufflinks, his face radiant. He looked like the man I had once fallen in love with. But I no longer confused charisma with character. He launched into his speech effortlessly, talked about growth, talked about mentorship, talked about the sacred nature of partnership. And then, as I knew he would, he said it. "I owe everything to my incredible wife. Amelia, your support has been the foundation of my success. You show me every day what true partnership looks like." He raised his glass. The room clapped again. He smiled at me, expecting the usual. But I didn't smile. I stood, walked toward the front of the room. Every heel click on that marble floor felt like thunder, and when I reached him, I took the microphone from his hand, gently like I was helping him finish his speech. "Thank you, darling," I said warmly. "I'd like to say a few words about partnership myself, if that's all right." Liam's smile froze. He had built the stage, but I was about to steal the show. The ballroom fell silent the moment I spoke, not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't have to. When a woman who's always smiled starts to speak with steel in her tone, people listen. "I'd like to say a few words about partnership," I repeated, microphone steady in my hand. Liam Carter gave me a strained smile, frozen at the podium. He couldn't stop Minot without confirming everything he had tried to hide. So he stepped aside, letting me stand in full view of his colleagues, mentors, and bosses. The very people who thought they knew him. I looked around the room. I saw tuxedos, glittering gowns, raised eyebrows, people who had seen me only as Liam's elegant wife. But tonight, they would see me as something else entirely. A woman who had been silent long enough. "Partnership," I began, "isn't built on control, or intimidation, or fear. It's built on honesty, on respect, on trust." I paused. I wanted them to feel the quiet before the storm, the electricity before the thunder. And tonight, I'd like to tell you what Liam Carter taught me about partnership. Just 3 weeks ago. Liam's face tightened, but he didn't move. He was trapped in the image he had so carefully built. I turned toward the audience again, voice calm but clear. On our 5th anniversary, Liam and I had dinner at the Elmore Room, a beautiful restaurant. Romantic, exclusive, perfectly curated, just like our marriage appeared to be. There were murmurs now, people leaning forward. "We talked about our future," I continued, "and I expressed something I had wanted for years, that it might be time to start a family." My voice never trembled. Liam disagreed. Harshly, publicly. Another pause. And then, he slapped me. A gasp broke through the room. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, physically. He slapped me, in front of diners, in front of staff. in front of the version of myself I had spent years silencing. I reached into my clutch and held up my phone. This is what that partnership looked like. The photo I had taken that night appeared on the ballroom screen behind me. The evidence I had uploaded minutes before the gala to a secure drive time to go live the moment I stepped up to speak. It showed everything: the red outline, the makeup smudged, the woman with fire returning to her eyes. The audience was stunned. I saw phones come out. I saw Liam's boss, James Whitmore, lean forward with his jaw tight, but I wasn't finished. Of course, I said. Liam apologized. Loudly, charismatically, for show. But apologies don't erase patterns. I clicked to the next slide. A spreadsheet, names of bank accounts, dates of transfers, amounts missing. Next to it, a PDF titled, Amelia Exit Plan. Gasps again. Louder this time. While I was building a home, I said softly, Liam was building an escape. One that left me financially vulnerable, silenced, powerless. But here's what he didn't count on. I turned and looked at him, directly this time. He didn't count on me watching, learning, preparing. Liam opened his mouth to speak, but James Whitmore stood first. That's enough, Liam, he said coldly. Security moved forward. And just like that, the man who once controlled every conversation in our house had no words. He was led away in stunned silence, but the room remained still. Dozens of eyes looked back at me, waiting, not for more scandal, but for truth, for the rest of the story. So I gave it to them. For 5 years, I believed that love meant patience, that silence was strength, that being a good partner meant disappearing slowly and quietly. I know better now. Strength isn't swallowing pain. Strength is using your voice, especially when someone tries to take it from you. Tonight, I reclaim mine. The room erupted. Not in pity, not in applause for drama, but in something deeper. Respect. I stepped down from the stage slowly. My heart was pounding, but my spine had never been straighter. People made way. They didn't look down. They looked at me, and they saw me. For the first time in years, I saw myself too. I woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window. It felt warmer somehow. Maybe because, for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't waking up in a home I shared with Liam Carter. I had left the gala alone, my heels in hand, my heart pounding, but my steps steady, and I didn't go back. Instead, I stayed at a hotel downtown, a small place with an honest front desk clerk and no questions asked. As I sat by the window with my coffee, I turned on the news. There it was, already breaking across local channels. Finance executive removed from gala after wife publicly accuses him of abuse and fraud. His name was trending, not for the reasons he liked, and my inbox flooded. From women I hadn't heard from in years, from strangers who saw the video on social media and whispered, "Thank you." Even from former colleagues who had once smiled politely while Liam cut me off in conversation, now writing, "I wish I had noticed sooner." But I wasn't looking for pity. I wasn't even looking for validation. I had already found what I needed the moment I took that microphone, my voice, and Liam. He lost everything he had built on the backs of fear and control. By noon, RevFit Capital had issued a statement. "We do not condone any form of abuse, emotional, financial, or physical. Mr. Liam Carter's employment has been terminated, effective immediately." It was cold, corporate, clinical, but it was final. For a man like Liam, losing his title was more devastating than losing a marriage, because titles were how he defined himself. And without that, he was just another man who thought control was love and learned otherwise. 2 days later, my attorney filed the official divorce papers with attachments, photographic evidence, financial documents, a detailed timeline of coercion.
We didn't ask for half, we asked for fair, which in our case still meant millions. Money he once thought would secure silence. Now, it built my new life, and I didn't waste time. I found an apartment with light in every room and no ghosts in the walls. I furnished it slowly, intentionally, not with expensive centerpieces, but with freedom. I took a job at a non-profit that helped women navigate emotional and financial abuse, because I understood something now. The most dangerous thing about abuse isn't bruises, it's invisibility. It's the way women like me learn to question our memories, to shrink ourselves in exchange for peace, to believe that patience will earn us kindness. It doesn't. Kindness isn't earned through silence. It's a right, a baseline, a bare minimum. One evening, I was organizing old boxes when I found my wedding album. I sat on the floor, unsure whether to burn it or simply look away. But I did look, page by page, and something surprising happened. I didn't cry. I felt gratitude, not for what Liam had done, but for what I had survived. For the woman who had held herself together long enough to gather proof. For the woman who had learned to leave with receipts, not revenge. I closed the album and put it back in the box, not out of grief, out of closure. A week later, my phone rang. His number. I let it go to voicemail. Then curiosity got the better of me, and I listened. Amelia. His voice was unrecognizable. Small, measured. I've been thinking about us. About everything. Maybe we could talk. Maybe we could try again. Click. I didn't let him finish. Because I wasn't the woman he left behind at that restaurant. I wasn't the woman he convinced to move, to quit, to stay quiet. I was someone he never expected. A woman who left on her own terms. Later that night I wrote in my journal, strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's a folder labeled evidence. Sometimes it's saying no without raising your voice. Sometimes it's walking away when the world expects you to stay. And sometimes strength is simply not answering the phone. They never tell you what comes after escape. You prepare for the confrontation. You imagine the courtroom, the headlines, the final door slam. But freedom? It's quieter than you think. It doesn't come with fanfare. It arrives in the smallest moments, folding laundry in peace, drinking coffee without dread, sleeping through the night without flinching at shadows. After Liam and I parted, there were no more raised voices, but there was also no more noise, just me. At first, I didn't know what to do with the silence. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment just outside Manhattan. The windows were old, but they opened wide. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. No more curated furniture, no more minimalist chic. My couch was second-hand, my dishes mismatched, but everything in that space was mine. And that was enough. I spent hours walking the city streets, remembering how to be a person outside of someone else's orbit, how to smile at strangers, how to order what I wanted, how to speak without seeking approval. Each day felt like waking up in increments. Each week, I reclaimed a piece of myself, and slowly I realized I hadn't just survived Liam, I had survived disappearing. And I didn't want any other woman to go through that alone. That's how I found the Haven Project. It was a modest non-profit tucked into a brownstone downtown. No flashy website, no corporate backers, just a few rooms, some battered chairs, and women who had seen things no one believed. They didn't know who I was when I walked in. They didn't care. I sat in a circle with 10 other women and said the words I had rehearsed in my head for months. My name is Amelia Carter. And I used to think love meant staying. No one gasped. No one judged. They just nodded. Because they knew. They had lived it. And in that room, I wasn't the woman from the video or the ex-wife of a disgraced executive. I was one of them. We laughed, we cried. We stitched ourselves back together, and one day someone asked,
Have you ever thought of speaking publicly? Your story could really help people. At first, I hesitated. But then I remembered the first time I stood behind a microphone, not to entertain, not to flatter, but to tell the truth. So I said yes. My first speaking engagement was at a community college. 30 students, folding chairs, bad coffee, and I was terrified. But then I looked out at their faces, young women, older women, a few men leaning in curiously, and I began. I told them about the Elmore room, the slap, the silence, the evidence. But more than that, I told them about the loneliness of being disbelieved, the way manipulation wears the face of love, the way abuse hides behind expensive curtains and polite smiles. When I finished, no one clapped right away. Instead, there was a long pause, then one hand, then another, until the whole room stood up. It wasn't for the speech, it was for survival. Since then, I've spoken at libraries, shelters, fundraisers. I've worked with lawyers helping women untangle joint finances they never agreed to. I've helped write grant proposals for housing programs. I'm not rich, but I am whole, and that matters more. Liam used to say I was too soft for the real world, but it turns out softness doesn't mean weakness. It means knowing when to stand, even if your knees shake. It means showing up, even if your voice cracks. It means holding space for someone else's pain, because you remember exactly what yours felt like. One afternoon, I sat on a bench outside the Haven Project, sipping tea, when a young woman approached. She was maybe 22, shoulders hunched, eyes wary. She said, "Are you the woman from the gala video?" I nodded. She hesitated, then whispered, "Thank you. You made me leave before it got worse." I wanted to hug her, but I just said, "You did the hardest part already. You left." And in that moment, I realized something. My story wasn't just about escape. It was about legacy. Not the kind you inherit. The kind you build out of courage, out of scars, out of choice. And I had finally chosen me. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had just finished a session at the Haven Project where a woman named Eliza Trembling, eyes swollen from tears, had whispered, "I don't even recognize myself anymore." And I had smiled softly, handing her a tissue and saying, "That's okay, you're not meant to stay small." I meant it, because I'd lived it. When I stepped outside, the sky was weeping. It felt fitting. I unlocked my phone to check the time, and that's when I saw the missed call. Liam Carter. I stared at the screen for a moment, the name glowing like an old wound. And then another notification. A voicemail. I should have deleted it, but something in me needed to hear what he'd say now that I was no longer in his shadow. So I listened. His voice was different. Gone was the booming confidence. In its place, a quiet, measured tone I barely recognized. "Amelia, I've been thinking a lot lately, about us, about everything. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe we could talk. Maybe we could try again. I've changed." Pause. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I just didn't see it then." Click. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of the slap, the bank accounts, the control, just nostalgia. And a suggestion that what he broke could simply be dusted off and picked back up. But I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel tempted. I felt nothing. The next day I sat at my kitchen table and drafted a letter I'd never send. It read, "Liam, the woman you married doesn't live here anymore. The one who bent to your moods, who shrank when you spoke, who cried in bathrooms and hid her bruises under silk sleeves, she's gone. In her place is someone you don't know, someone who no longer confuses power with love. Someone who no longer mistakes staying for strength. You say you've changed, but change is more than regret. It's reflection, it's repentance, it's silence without expectation. I don't hate you, Liam, but I no longer owe you conversation. I don't owe you comfort. I owe myself peace, and that means not letting you back in. I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it in a box labeled, Things I Survived. Then I made tea. A week passed. He tried again text messages this time. You look amazing in your new photos. I've been following your speaking tour, proud of you. Block, then an email. I just want closure, delete. Then a mutual friend reached out. He's really struggling. Maybe it would help him to hear from you. And for the first time I responded. Closure isn't a gift I owe someone who caused the damage. One afternoon, I was preparing to speak at a conference on domestic financial abuse. The room was filled with professionals, therapists, attorneys, advocates, people who fought every day for women who didn't yet know they were allowed to leave. And as I stepped on stage, I began with this. Sometimes the person who breaks you comes back not because they love you, but because they see you healing without them. They mistake your wholeness for an invitation. But let me tell you something, healing isn't an open door, it's a boundary. The crowd nodded, some teared up. Because they understood, because too many of them had faced their own versions of Liam, with different names, different faces, but the same script. And I wasn't reading from that script anymore. That night, I went home and stood in front of the mirror, not the one where I once saw a red handprint, but the one where I now saw a woman wearing her own name. Amelia Carter. Not someone's wife. Not someone's secret. Not someone's shame. Just me. Whole, visible, unapologetic. Liam had knocked on the door of the past, but I had already moved. It's been a year. 12 months since the night I stood in a ballroom, microphone in hand, and told the truth. 12 months since I walked away from the man who once convinced me that silence was love and obedience was loyalty, and I've never looked back. Not once, because freedom, once you taste it, doesn't leave your mouth. It lingers like the first good breath after holding your lungs underwater too long. People often ask, do you regret anything? And here's my answer. I regret waiting so long to stop shrinking, because for 5 years I had been editing myself, softening my voice, folding my opinions into neat little corners so they wouldn't upset him. I had learned to speak in tones, not truths. But that's what they don't tell you about survival. It can look like smiling. It can sound like laughter. It can wear heels and host dinner parties. But deep down, I was fading until the moment I stopped. Today, I don't speak for revenge. I speak for clarity. I speak because I know someone, somewhere is sitting at a dinner table right now, being told they're too sensitive. Someone is watching the person they love become a stranger behind closed doors. Someone is walking on eggshells in a house they pay half the mortgage on, and they're wondering, is this normal? Am I imagining this? Maybe if I just wait it out. To you, I say this, you are not crazy. You are not overreacting, and you are not alone. If my story has taught anyone anything, I hope it's this. The quiet ones are not weak. They are collecting strength like evidence, and when the time comes, they rise. These days I speak in classrooms and courtrooms, in shelters and symposiums, in boardrooms that once shut their doors to women like me, not because I enjoy reliving the pain, but because I know silence protects abusers, stories protect survivors. I've met women who escaped with nothing but their children and their will to start over. Women who hid bruises under scarves and shame under smiles. And do you know what they all had in common? They thought they were alone. Until someone told the truth out loud. I once thought I had lost everything when I left Liam. Security, reputation, status, but I was wrong. What I lost wasn't mine to begin with. What I gained couldn't be taken away. I gained my name, my voice, my spine, my future. And in doing so, I gave others permission to begin again too. Sometimes Liam's name still comes up in conversations. Someone will say, "Did you hear what happened to your ex?" And I'll smile politely and reply, "Oh, him." I don't keep up. I've been busy living. Because that's the final power you hold over someone who tried to break you. You forget them while becoming unforgettable. Before I end this chapter, I want to speak directly to the woman watching this video. Yes, you. The one who smiled all through dinner. The one who keeps deleting her search history. The one who rehearses what she'd say if anyone ever asked, "Are you okay?" Let me be clear, you don't need bruises to prove something's broken. You don't need permission to reclaim your life. You don't need to wait until it gets worse to decide you've had enough. You just need one moment of courage. One breath that says, "No more." And if no one has told you lately, you're worth that moment. I still wear the emerald dress, not because it reminds me of Liam, but because it reminds me of the night I stopped apologizing for taking up space. It hangs in my closet like a badge of rebirth, and every time I see it, I whisper to myself, "You made it out. You stayed out, and you never ever shrunk again." For years, Amelia Carter was the kind of woman who didn't cause trouble. She smiled when expected, supported quietly, and let her husband shine, even when it meant dimming her own light. But the most important lesson she learned is one many women recognize too late. Being the understanding one doesn't mean you must accept being unseen, unheard, or disrespected. Amelia's story reminds us that dignity doesn't always raise its voice, but it always keeps its receipts. She didn't seek revenge. She sought truth. And when the time came, she stood up not just for herself, but for every woman who has ever been told to stay small to keep the peace. No matter your age, it's never too late to choose yourself. Whether you're 35 or 75, the act of reclaiming your voice can begin today with one boundary, one decision, one step. True partnership, romantic or otherwise, must be built on mutual respect. If that's missing, silence only protects the one doing harm. So speak, even if your voice shakes, because courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like a woman finally saying, "No more,"